It is Election Day in Georgia, where voters will decide which party controls the United States Senate. Republican Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are facing tough challenges from Democrats Reverend Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff. Here to share their perspectives are CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist Leslie Sanchez and CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Antjuan Seawright. Good to see you both. Happy New Year. Leslie, let's start with you.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, good to see you guys. One of the big headlines out of President Trump's rally in Georgia last night, Leslie, came from Senator Loeffler. I want to play a clip.
I have an announcement, Georgia. On January 6th, I will object to the Electoral College vote. That's right. Thank you. We're going to get this done.
So before last night, Senator Loeffler had not said whether she would join some of her Republican colleagues in objecting to the certification of Electoral College votes tomorrow. Leslie, were you surprised?
Not surprised at all, Vlad. I think you probably read that in the tea leaves a while back. We talked about kind of where the tale of two Republican parties. There's the Republicans who are saying we need a smooth transition of government, accepting the results of November, and moving ahead to get ready for a Biden administration, but kind of jockeying for political posture and what to do with this tremendous base of support Trump has. Then there is the Trump populist movement, which there are many who feel the president, the election was taken away from him. And it's not a small number, Vlad. It's a very significant part of the Republican Party. So for political purposes, you see where people are lining up. This is about future, not only today's election, but future elections and leadership within the party. And that rift is going to continue to transpire as long as we move forward in these kind of uncharted waters.
So Loeffler's opponent, Reverend Raphael Warnock, took a different tone at the Democratic rally yesterday. He talked about his humble beginnings, about how his mother worked as a teenager picking cotton and tobacco, and then he said that he believes in the American dream. I want to play some of that sound.
The wealthy and the well-connected have no shortage of representation in Washington. It's time for ordinary folk to have representation in Washington, and if you send me to the Senate, every single day I'll have Georgia on my mind.
Antjuan, who are Reverend Warnock and the Democrats trying to reach here? Is his strategy working? And I want to also sort of consider that earlier I called them Siamese twin candidates because Warnock and Ossoff are sort of like connected at the hip in this particular race. The Democrats need to win both seats to shift the balance of power in the Senate. So though Warnock is quite a different candidate than Ossoff, they're connected.
Well, you know, elections are all about turnout, and that's pretty obvious. But this type of election, a runoff election, or in some cases a special election, are all about base turnout. Because if you cannot turn out your base, you have no chance in hell at winning. I think both candidates understand that. In a place like Georgia, where on November 3rd you had such a large surge among African-American voters, API voters, and young voters, the goal has always been to continue engagement with those particular constituencies and make certain they turn back out in this type of election. And that's the only way you have a chance of being successful. Because we all know the other side is going to be fully energized and they want to turn out. They want a reason to vote against the Democratic agenda because they're all about fear, anger, frustration, and confusion. And so we saw that play out. But I think what Reverend Warnock has done a great job of doing is speaking to the hearts and minds and emotions of some of the more consequential constituencies in this country, in particular, the heartbeat and soul of the Democratic Party, African-American voters. every election becomes even more and more consequential, in particular for black voters. And when you have one of your own, someone who can not only speak to your experiences, but share your experiences, it becomes even more emotional. So the need and the urge to turn out becomes even greater. And I oftentimes remind people, these elections, as they come and as they go, tend to fall on the case of survival for black people. They become life or death for certain constituencies, because we know the people who end up winning are going to make decisions that will determine how your quality of life will be at the end of any given election cycle.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, Antjuan. And Leslie, the president's leaked phone call with Georgia's Secretary of State continues to be a campaign issue. To the point that Antjuan was making there, you know, it strikes me that not enough people are talking about the black and brown voters who voted for President-elect Biden and Kamala Harris. You hear a lot of people saying, well, you know, there's 70 million people out there who, you know, don't have confidence in this election, and that's who the president and that's who folks like Josh Hawley are fighting for. But who's fighting for those 80 million plus voters who voted for the president-elect? And that sort of came to a head in this phone call with the president and Brad Raffensperger. And Brad Raffensperger actually spoke with CBSN News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell last night. I want to play a bit of that sound for you and our audience.
Why do you think the president wanted to speak with you directly?
Probably to see if he could influence me to change my decisions. But in a way, I'm not really making a decision. What I'm doing, I'm following the law and I'm following the facts. The numbers are the numbers, and the numbers we reported are factually correct.
So what's fascinating to me, Antjuan and Leslie, is you're really seeing, I mean, you've got now folks like Mitt Romney. There are Republicans like Brad Raffensperger, like the governor of Georgia, like the lieutenant governor, Jeff Duncan, who was on our air this morning, who represent conservative values. They vote for Republicans. They would like to see Republicans take control of the Senate after the election today. But you're dealing with a group of people who believe in a cult of personality, who believe because the president on a phone call with Raffensperger says there are rumors about election rigging, and so because of that, you got to find me those votes. You got to find me those votes. So I want to ask both of you, are we seeing, Leslie, a split in the Republican Party? Could that come to a head in the years ahead? And Antjuan, what about what I mentioned earlier, the notion that you would disenfranchise the people who voted for the president-elect? So Leslie first.
There's definitely a rift, Vlad. It's been ongoing. You've seen all the hand-wringing, you know, and collecting of the pearls of the establishment Republicans who didn't know how to handle, you know, the movement, the Trump movement that we're seeing today that is not dying down. And there were so many in the anti-Trump movement that said, you know, Republicans that were anti-Trump that said, oh, once you get rid of Trump, this is all going to die down and we'll go back to, you know, kumbaya, what we were before. And that's just not the case. These are voters who are very frustrated with Republican, Democrat. They want different types of solutions. And that is what you're hearing from a lot. You're going to hear it in the Senate today. That's what you're hearing, people Republicans trying to speak to that base of support of Trump. Regarding those phone calls and such, I will tell you this, the thing to think about is there's so many voters who say they don't think the president should concede. They want the transfer of power, but not concede. So my question to them is, what do you know, the president's going to leave the keys to the White House under the doormat and say, you know, let yourself in. There really isn't a logical way that this moves forward. It's going to be a really tough political process for the party.
Vlad, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time, borrowing words from Maya Angelou. So no one should be shocked about the phone call, the behavior, and the response from some of the Republicans as it relates to this election, and even some of the support Leslie just talked about that he's receiving about not conceding this election. So I'm not surprised about that, nor am I surprised about this effort to further suppress and depress voters of color. If my grandmother were here, Vlad, you know what she would say? She would say, Antjuan, there's no education in the second kick of the mule. They've been doing this to us and been trying to do this toward us for a very long time. But in spite of suppression, in spite of efforts to depress our vote, black voters still show up. 115,000 people who did not vote in the November 3rd election voted in this election. Of that number, 40% make up voters of color. You saw the 60 some odd percent surge among voters of color in the November 3rd election, and we saw the turnout, and we see the enthusiasm and the groundwork that has been laid in a place like Georgia, where you see young people and voters of color finding their voice. And what we have all figured out is that when we show up, change happens, and that's why you see these efforts to further suppress and depress our vote.
Both Leslie and Antjuan, a tremendous amount of money has been raised with these two races from inside Georgia, but plenty of it from outside Georgia. We've already seen that at times that no matter how much money is raised, when you're trying to sort of flip a state or flip a seat, it may not be enough. But I want to ask both of you guys, what do you think all that money is about? Is it just about these two races? Is it about the Senate, or is it about something much larger beyond the outcome of these two races? Leslie.
There's no doubt that ever since you've had raising money digitally and virtually, it's been tremendously important to political campaigns. But in this case, this is a movement raise, right? This is about what is actually going to happen in the balance of power for Republicans. It says what kind of resistance can they put forward against a Biden administration to bring them to the table, to have better negotiations. And there's a bit of fear in that. So this is a long-term approach about kind of unraveling what the Trump administration has done, but also fear. A lot of it you would argue is fear or concern for what a Biden administration is going to do without a Republican watchdog, meaning the Senate, to be there. So that balance of power tends to be the spark that gets people interested. They don't want one party rule one way or the other. They want to see that there's a check and balance on each other.
I think
Antjuan,
this is about molding.
Modify that a little. Antjuan, I want to modify that a little, because we know that the Democratic Party has been looking at kind of a broader strategy, right? Winning back the South. And we've seen that even though a lot of money can be raised in some of these races, it doesn't always translate into a win, though they've presented some really, really sort of formidable challenges to people like Lindsey Graham and others. So I want to ask you, how important is it for sort of the broader Democratic strategy to have a win, either one or both, in Georgia when it comes to this race?
Well, I think politics is a game of expectations, and you always underpromise and overdeliver. So I'm not going to be the Democratic voice to tell you that we are 100% going to have victory tonight in any way, shape, or form. Here's what I will tell you, is that the investments in being made in Georgia from a long-term perspective shows the opportunities that exist for Democrats, not just in Georgia, but all across the South. It also demonstrates that Democrats are treating African-American voters, black and brown voters, as an investment, and that is an expense. What I love about the narrative in Georgia is the fact that for the first time in my political lifetime, I'm starting to see true relationship building, not necessarily coalition building for an election, but relationship building. And we all know components of a relationship that make a relationship work: trust, time, investments, constant communication, and back and forth dialogue. And we're starting to see that play out in Georgia, in North Carolina, and some other places. Some will come online sooner than others, but it's a long game. And that's why, regardless of what happens tonight, I am very excited about what could be because of the work that has been done in Georgia. We're going to see a catalog of things come out of the Senate race tonight. One of the things I know for certain is that going forward, Democrats and Republicans are going to have to treat places like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina as true battleground states, because we're not living in conventional times. So you throw out this idea of conventional wisdom that these are Republican strongholds.
Antjuan and Leslie, miss talking to you guys. Isn't that great? Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.